Welcome to today's session, everyone.
We are PREview, a student-led organization established in the fall of 2021.
Our goal as an organization was to create an online program for pre-medical students at community colleges and universities, with the hope of guiding the next generation of diverse and inclusive physicians.
And while we advertise our organization as being for community college students, our events are open to anyone.
We realize that finding guidance and mentorship in a pre-med journey can be especially challenging for first-generation pre-med students,
people that lack the financial resources, or just those who do not know people in the medical field.
One of the best parts about our events is that they are virtual, so you can do it from the comfort of your own home.
We typically have events on Fridays from 5 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and on Saturdays from 11 a.m. to 12:30 Pacific Standard Time.
If you aren't able to attend the event, all of our sessions are uploaded on our YouTube channel.
Many of our sessions will end up with a Q&A with the speakers.
Any questions that you have, you may put it in the Q&A session on Zoom, and our team members will read them and have them answer.
After you have attended our event, you can log into our website and complete the quiz, which will contain questions pertaining to our session today.
If you score 70% or higher on the quiz, you will be awarded a certificate to show that you attended our session today.
If you want to stay connected with the upcoming events or just want to tell your pre-med friends about the pre-med CC, you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok as @PreMedCC.
Thank you and welcome everyone. My name is Veronica and today I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Emil Check. Emil Check, PhD, is Director of Advising Services for Health Professional Student Association, HPSA. He brings over 15 years of experience as a health professions advisor and admissions professional for medical, dental, and other health professional programs. Previously, he served as Director of Admissions and Recruitment at Rosalind Franklin University of Medicine and Science, Director of Admissions at the School of Dental Medicine at Case Western Reserve University, and as a pre-health professional advisor at George Mason University. Dr. Check serves as an expert resource on admissions and has been quoted on articles by the Association of American Medical Colleges, AAMC. Dr. Check, welcome.
Great. Thank you so much for having me as your speaker this afternoon or morning, wherever you happen to be. And on behalf of us over at the Health Professional Student Association, we're really glad to partner again with the Pre-Med CC team. So thank you so much. Because of bandwidth issues, I'm going to try to share my screen and turn my camera off. I hope you guys don't mind. But hopefully this will be a pretty smooth presentation. So again, thank you guys.
We can see it.
Can you hear me?
We could hear you and we could see it. Yep.
Okay, so let's just hope that I can advance my slide. Okay, good. So once again, thank you guys so much. We really are happy to be partners with those of you in Pre-Med CC. Just a little bit of a brief introduction. We're the Health Professional Student Association. We've been around for almost 30 years, and we are dedicated to helping individuals regardless of their financial or race or ethnic or heritage background. If you want to serve your community as a healthcare provider, we want to help you get there. We do this with partnerships with organizations like Pre-Med CC, as well as offering donor-supported coaching and advising and other resources and tools, including the Student Doctor Network forums and our articles that we have written for many, many years. So we do appreciate our opportunity to really share with you some of our expertise and knowledge. And again, I thank everyone here for giving me a chance to at least try to present this presentation. So I hope my slide can advance. Come on. All right, so a little bit of insight, and I'm going to ask that for those of you who are on chat, if you guys are applying this cycle, I'm really interested in seeing if you guys are going to be taking or planning, or you are planning on taking any of the major situational judgment tests that are coming up for this application cycle. We're going to talk a little bit about the Casper and the PREview situational judgment tests in particular, but there are many other online interviewing formats that you may need to be aware of as well. So I'm going to go through a little bit about what those situational judgment tests look like in this application cycle, not just for medical school actually, but for other health professions programs. But we're going to focus on med school admissions. We're also going to talk about the quote unquote anatomy of situational judgment scenarios and give you a little bit of an idea of what these scenarios are really all about, as well as address concerns that most people have with regards to whether your answer is quote right or wrong in those scenarios and what some of the influences and factors are. Really, in actuality, most of these tests aren't going to be testing you on whether you have a specific right, quote unquote, or wrong answer for the most part, but there are certainly better answers than others. And finally, if we have a little bit of time before question and answer, we'll go through a little bit of practice. I've set up a few scenarios, and for those of you who are on the call here, you may be able to join us. I'm using the Poll Everywhere platform to be able to engage you guys to sort of come up with responses rather than use the chat function here in Zoom. So let's see. So as I try to go to the next slide. So we know a lot of things that you've been told about what makes a great doctor. And for example, I think many of you are pretty much familiar with most of these concepts. We really look for people who are very intelligent and have a great capacity to learn many things cognitively. But you've also heard in more recent years, we're also not just looking for your science acumen, but also how well you have so-called higher order thinking skills, as well as what we will term the power skills. So that if you have this whole entire package, you should be able to not just know about medicine, but be able to practice medicine, to be able to get engaged with caregivers, to be able to relate to and work well together with other healthcare providers, one way or another. So all of these skills are really important and are very important for holistic review. But one other piece that I know many people have a lot of trouble with is this concept of mission fit, in terms of how you match the values of the programs and how you meet the needs of the community those programs actually serve. There's actually a lot known about admissions processes and certain elements of applications that really give us the most valid data regarding this sort of fit. And I'm sorry about giving you this big slide here, but you can kind of notice the two that I've bold-faced here are situational judgment tests and multiple mini interviews, which are sort of very similar to each other in that they present specific situations that seem to be mapped well with organizational or cultural values of the programs that you're going to be attending. One of the differences between the terms is that usually situational judgment tests are normally delivered in a manner that is high volume. So the intention of many situational judgment tests that you see in the normal employment world is that they want to sort of start narrowing down a little bit and favor individuals who have a much stronger understanding of the culture of the organization that you're going to be joining. And so I just want to make sure that you know these are things that are actually very prolific in the employment world. Many other programs are really thinking about or have been using situational judgment tests in real life. So this is really nothing new. It's just that it's new for the benefit of medical school admissions. Let's see the next slide that I have here. So under the umbrella of situational judgment tests, because of the pandemic, many schools and programs have really begun to become more familiar with and become more comfortable with online delivery, especially of multiple mini interviews, or once you get into a program, you'll hear about objective structured clinical exams, which are essentially situational judgment tests, but on a clinical professional type level. So I kind of put that under the umbrella in this case because many schools are going to still do virtual interviews, and you might as well become familiar with online delivery of multiple mini interviews. And so I put that under this context. The two major players with regard to situational judgment tests you've heard of are Casper Duet, which is under the Acuity Insights banner. It's part of a suite of tools that Acuity Insights offers various programs for selection of students or in the future selection of residents. The PREview exam has been under development for a while. I'll talk about that as well, but you may have heard about this in general. It's a program that has just started to gain more momentum in terms of getting more AMCAS schools to take part in it. And there is one ACOMA school, a DO program, that is also using ANC PREview as part of its assessment. There are other platforms aside from those two that can deliver situational judgment tests. And one of the ones that I know I will say I have a good affinity for from my days in admissions is known as the Cura Talent Assessment. And you may hear about that in certain programs that you may come across. But one of the things that I do want to get a sense of is that, chances are, especially beginning this year, is really high that people who are applying to medical school are going to be taking at least one of those exams. And if you just did a quick run through, and this is a little bit of an older slide by like 2 weeks, I ran through the table of, who was taking PREview and who was taking Casper, and determined, where are there states for which there are at least 2 programs, one of which could request or require Casper, the other could request or require PREview. And it turns out that these 7 states seem to be in a situation where if you're an in-state applicant, you have a high likelihood of taking both of these situational judgment tests in order for you to be eligible for all of the in-state programs available in that state. You count up the number of applicants, and if you just use last year's numbers, turns out to be about 20% of the applicant pool could be taking both situational judgment tests this year in order to get into medical school. So this is something that I'm very sure many, if it's both tests, certainly a larger proportion is going to be faced with the opportunity of taking one or the other test as well. And that's at least the reason why we've been doing so much work in trying to make people less anxious about these types of situational judgment tests as well. So just letting you know, for Casper itself, it's probably been a little bit more well known, but many other health professional programs have been using Casper for quite a long period of time, up to about 10 years. But so basically for medical schools, we're sort of a little bit on the late side of things when it comes to understanding that situational judgment test is something that we could incorporate into our admissions decisions. More interestingly is that in the last couple of years, more residency programs as a whole have begun to start considering the entire Acuity Insight suite, and especially Casper, as part of the process for residency selection. So if you were going to take an SJT to be eligible for an interview at a residency program in these areas, that's something that's starting to gain momentum within graduate medical education. So even if you think you can completely avoid these SJTs, these situational judgment tests in your admissions process into medical school, chances are that you will be facing one of these in your subsequent residency education as well in that selection process. So, don't think that this is going to be something that's going to go away. There's been lots of research done on situational judgment tests over the years, and for very well-designed tests, most people who take those tests find them to be very fair, very accurate of skills and activities and tasks that you get to do on the job. Granted, when they are very well designed, you're going to see that compared to traditional cognitive ability exams, these types of exams actually minimize or have much smaller differences among individuals from race or lower socioeconomic status. And you can kind of see the skills that we really are rewarding in many of those exams on the situational judgment tests really deal with interpersonal interaction and social skills. So these are the reasons why these tests have been popular in the general world. So, so again, do not be afraid of these exams. They're very, very good. You just need to prepare and understand what's involved with them. So on this slide are 2 of the 3 assessments that Acuity Insights delivers. You will know about Casper. It's been around for about 20 years. There's a number of papers that talk about its validation. It's based on scenarios and competencies, and it's very well known for its open-ended response format. So you'll see a number of scenarios. Some of them will be based on some sort of acted performance that you will see. Others will be written in text that you will be responding to. And so you can find out on their website about what Casper is all about. You can take some practice samples of some of the questions that they have there. Raters are recruited and independently trained in order for all of those responses to be scored. And then there's the score that is released to the individual schools, and the quartile range where you land is released to you. Duet is also starting to gain a little bit more interest among medical schools, and it's a different type of test. It doesn't involve you really interacting in situations, but rather it gauges your values and what you are looking for in a program so that mission fit can be more, I guess, objectively assessed. So there's some information about that on the Duet site as well. And so right now I really see maybe 2 or 3 medical schools really doing Duet, but understand that this is something that is available to those programs. PREview, in contrast, has been in development for about 10 years, especially since the MCAT was reconfigured back in 2015. There was always interest in trying to put in and fit in a situational judgment test at that time period, but they couldn't figure out a good way of doing it until fairly recently. So they've done a number of different validation studies and have taken it out of a pilot phase as of last year. These are focused on the 8 specific AAMC core competencies, especially for pre-professional competencies that are developed for medical schools. And they really focus on gauging your understanding of what effective pre-professional behavior is and what is expected of you, especially in an academic medical context. This is a multiple choice test. So instead of you writing out your responses, you're actually given a chance to assess how effective or ineffective a certain response is to a given context. This is thus a little bit different from the other exam. It's a scaled score that's normalized over multiple, I think up to 3 admission cycles, and a test key was developed based on a survey of individuals in student affairs, admissions, and diversity and inclusion. So consequently, unlike the MCAT, where there have been times where if you really feel you need to rescore your test or you need to appeal a question, that's not possible for PREview. And again, the only thing that I would pretty much tell you is as you're going through your preparation for some of these questions, if you're seeing them, you probably want to keep in mind, what would the administrators want you to do at medical school in given that situation? What do they expect? How do they expect you to behave under ideal circumstances or respond to that situation? So I encourage you, for all of these resources, take the time to go into their websites, the constructors' websites, and get a bit of a sense of what the exam is all about. In terms of the competencies themselves, the Casper assessment really articulates, I think somewhere in the neighborhood of about, I think that's 9 different competencies, which I sort of list here on the left side. The pre-professional competencies from AAMC are listed on the right side. And I've done my best to sort of give you sort of a rough equivalency of one competency in one test to another competency in the other. So you see them through arrows. The red competencies on one side seem to match more or less the 2 red competencies on the other side. And you'll notice that problem solving is explicitly listed as a competency in Casper, not so much in the PREview competencies themselves, but it also comes with the design of the situational judgment test that problem solving really winds up being important when you're taking the Casper exam. So we're going to go through a little bit of that later on. But I know many of you who are probably thinking and sort of freaking out about how do you prepare for these exams? How do other people do it? And one of the things that was important for us is that we wanted to capture a number of people's experiences taking both of these exams last year and try to get a sort of a sense of what the consensus strategy has been. So we published a poll, or results from our poll from last summer, about the situational judgment test experience, and just try to get a sense of what it was like for you to take that exam. So let's see. All right, so I hope my slide will advance. There we go. So a couple of quick insights. It was a very quick poll. Most of the respondents are taking these exams at home, following the instructions of the test constructors. One of the things that we request is that, hey, people are using free resources because there weren't many resources out there. It includes our SDN situational judgment test form, which we have roughly 40 different scenarios that come in. And of course, a lot of social media advice, because everyone likes to go to social media. One of the questions that we always had asked or got asked was, how do Casper and PREview compare? So if you get to see that, if you're seeing that table, one of the things that I did is for PREview and Casper, if you want to compare them properly, you want to have like the same language. So I recalibrated the preview scores into quartiles and asked the people who responded to sort of list what quartile of preview score you happen to take. What's interesting is you'll see in our little sample poll here, we had 27 people who took both Casper and Preview, especially within the last year or maybe a little bit later than that too. And you get a sense of the distribution of scores. So you see from this matrix, one of the things that's remarkable, if you sum the numbers across each row, you get a sense of how many people scored in a certain quartile for Casper. If you summed all the numbers by every column, you'll get a sense of how many people scored in a certain quartile for Preview. And what you'll see is there's an interesting distribution difference between Casper scores and Preview scores if you just focused on quartiles being sort of the common denominator here. You can quantify that by seeing at the very bottom there, you can average everyone's quartile rank, and you can kind of see in general, Preview is going to be slightly higher, shifted higher than Casper. And that's kind of designed. A Preview is meant so that it's a 9-point scale. Everyone pretty much is in the middle, is scoring a 5, and it turns out that percentile is about 58 or 59%. So most of those scores you see will fall in the 5 category compared to any of the other tails of that distribution. So this is normal, quite frankly. So let's do a larger assessment of this distribution. But what I want to make sure you knew is that the distributions are going to be different. Just because you scored a high quartile in one test does not mean you're going to score highly in the other. If you just look at Casper itself, because we have a lot more data on Casper, although they've only been releasing quartile scores for like the last 2 or 3 cycles, what we find is that in general, everyone is behaving quote unquote normally. So roughly half the number of people are scoring below 50% as there are above 50%. We were able to capture some people who were in professionals, who were already admitted into professional school. So they were already medical students or health profession students that are not in medical school that use the Casper exam. One of the things that you see remarkably is that that average has shifted upward towards basically centered around the 3rd quartile. I put the asterisk in there because at least with our very small sample size, we were not able to collect anybody who said that they got in the 1st quartile that got into a professional program. Now, I don't know what that means and don't read too much into it. It could be that based on a whole number of other criteria, it ultimately weeds out those people who have 1st quartile scores as opposed to an active filter. So I want to make sure that you understand we're not suggesting that schools are actively filtering out for lower quartile scores. It could be many other things instead. And we're looking to see how that actually is occurring. If you compare that to some of our data from the Preview exam, and you'll notice that there's only maybe 2 additional people who only just took Preview and not both Preview and Casper, you're going to see that, again, the tendency still remains pretty much central around that 5 score. But one of the things that was really interesting to me that has since been sort of, at least been acknowledged in many internal assessments that have been done on Preview is that for whatever reason, individuals from underrepresented minorities are still still lagging in terms of their performance. They're performing in a more of a so-called normal pattern, half the people above 50%, half the people below 50%, compared to the normal average performance of anyone who was taking Preview. Interestingly, that 50-50 split that you saw that happens in Casper is close to more of a normal behavior for Casper exams. So it's a very interesting phenomenon that I think many people are interested in teasing out a little bit more, especially in subsequent years and subsequent data. But that's something that has been at least acknowledged by many other people who are looking at these trends for these situational judgment tests. Now, we were able to ask in our poll, what were some of the challenges you had taking these exams? So for the most part in Casper, most of the complaints that we captured have been consistent over a number of years, which is managing time during the exam, especially for responses where you are typing in your answers. Usually you get 5 minutes to respond to 3 questions in a typed format, and a lot of students feel very much under the gun and under a lot of pressure to answer all 3 question prompts in that period of time. So one of the things that one needs to be able to overcome is that sense of pressure, but being able to deliver your answer within the amount of time that addresses as many of the prompts as possible. And I know that's something that's an issue. For preview exam, one of the things that came up very commonly as an issue is the proctoring and connection issues. And what this means is that for whatever reason, people are not feeling comfortable giving up control of their device, your computer, your laptop, to an external remote proctor. Now, this may be changing because of the fact that we have, a number of years dealing with online exams since COVID. But in response to that, there is a new video on the preview site that basically helps you anticipate what that experience, that connection experience is going to be like when you take the exam. So needless to say, AAMC acknowledges, or at least the people who are designing the test acknowledge, that that is an issue that they want to make sure people are aware of up ahead of time. Everybody across the board talks about the lack of practice questions. And I will certainly tell you that there are practice questions on both the Casper and the PREview test constructor site, but they are untimed. So again, going back to the scenario we had before, knowing what it's like to simulate taking the exam under timed conditions the way you can for the MCAT and so many other tests, we've not gotten to that point where we have a true simulated test experience for practice exams in the same way that Casper, in the same way that it would feel like when you would take Casper or PREview. This may change in the next couple of years as more and more, especially the for-profit companies, figure out how to emulate that user interface or user experience. But I just want to make sure that that the ability to practice under time pressure is something that is still very much sought after. And that's one of the reasons why we in our organization have been trying to develop more and more opportunities for participants to take online simulated exams. I have an online simulated MMI that I can help develop and construct for people, but it's not necessarily going to be exactly the same thing compared to if you took a Cure Talent exam or a PREview exam or any of the other online MMIs that schools may individually develop on their own. As I mentioned, there are online MMIs for interviews. If you did happen to be invited for an online interview, especially for the Cure Talent portal, I'm guessing also through what you will hear is an AMP portal, the Application Management Program portal that many medical schools use through Zoom and WebEx. There are opportunities where you can actually play test and test your technology so that you are more acclimated to taking these exams. But needless to say, we don't know. And there's still a lack of detail in many of the reports about interview formats from the medical school admissions requirements database. This may change over a very short period of time. I know there's a recent update that just came out this week, and I just haven't had a chance to really rummage through it, but make sure that you do access your MSAR frequently and look at that MSAR report if you can about the interview formats that could give you some insight. I will say this is exclusive to the AMCAS process. We know that so many of the other programs that use Casper, there's very little detail about knowing what schools are using it in their specific versions of the MSAR. You can find out about it for Casper by just signing up for the test, or if you happen to go through each school's website. But it's one of the things that's very challenging. A lot of people on the advisor side of things are doing what we can to really make sure we can get all that information out transparently to everyone. So I'm going to go through a little bit of some basics of making decisions, and I'm going to warn you guys ahead of time. If you open up another tab, we're going to use the Poll Everywhere platform, and this is the link that you're going to be used. So it's polleverywhere.com, pollev.com/Emil Check, my full name with no spaces, 316. So there's going to be some questions that we'll be interacting with in that portal. So I want to make sure that if you are able to get to that site in another tab or something, that you give yourself the chance to do that. But let's go through some basics of decision making. When do you find yourself in a position where you've needed to make a decision? Well, quite frankly, for pretty much all the time for most of us. Many of the times the decisions we make are very routine, very much every day, versus some decisions that have a real big consequence. You're going to have decisions that are very impulsive. So you're under a time pressure to really make a decision versus other opportunities where you can be more strategic and more thoughtful. And of course, it's also very important to know if you don't have enough information when you can go for help. So these are all really important opportunities for you to really understand what it's like to make a decision. So just to make sure our technology is working, I have this one practice question. If you are able to go to Poll Everywhere as it starts to run its magic on Poll Everywhere, you're going to see this is an example of like an everyday decision, which really doesn't have a significant consequence. But if you do get a chance to look at it, you should be able to respond to the question as soon as it's starting to run. So I can tell if it runs once this gets off of the screen. So let me give myself a little bit of a chance. Here we go. I think it should be running on your tablet or your platform or wherever you are if you're on your phone. And you should be able to choose one of those choices just to see, if you go to your favorite coffee shop once a month and you give a tip for a $5 order, how much do you tip? So if there are 8 of you on this call, I'm going to kind of wait until there's pretty much about 4 or 5 of you before I close this poll. All right, I'm going to close this poll in, however my computer will respond to it in 3, 2, 1. And hopefully if I get to the next slide, here we go. All right. So this is just sort of a breakdown to see where everyone falls. You have enough money. A lot of people, many of you are going to be tipping $1 or more. A few people are not going to be tipping much, up to 50 cents or so. And you kind of know there's really no correct answer, but there's probable reasons why you are considering a tip at a certain range. Part of it is your value of the experience, of the quality of the food that you get. Others of you may be familiar with how much money one makes as a barista or in food services. And so, that pittance is you probably are very aware of how much that actually is in terms of it being a pittance. And so giving as much money as you're able to express your appreciation, that comes into play here and there about that. So, I just want to make sure, there's no right, no wrong answer with this, but needless to say, that's just an example of the many questions that really pop up. And I'm sure you may have been sort of thrown with a lot of other circumstances, cultural circumstances, whether, I know here in America, in the US, we tend to tip in a certain way versus in other countries, you may not be more prone to tipping one way or another. So again, it's not a big deal or, it's not a problem if one way or another. There's no wrong answer to this, but understanding the reasons why and articulating those reasons why you make a choice the way you do, that's really what matters and what's really important. So let me see if I can go to my next slide. Sorry if it takes a while to get there. I apologize if it skips ahead. Okay, come on. One more. Let's go back one. I skipped a little too far ahead on my slides here. Again, whatever questions you have, feel free to use the Q&A slot as you can. Okay, so I have another question that will pop up. And so what I want to show you is that, a lot of times in many situations that you do make decisions that may have a little bit more consequence. A lot of times we make decisions based on these major factors. And many of you who've taken psychology may recognize this concept as the Maslow hierarchy of needs. a lot of times when we make decisions, we want to make sure we keep in mind that our physiological needs are met, such as food or water or rest. So if you're hungry or you need some sleep, those are some things. It's important to make sure that whatever decision that you make puts you in a position of safety. So security is a very important piece, and that's what will determine how some people will make decisions. Many of us will make decisions because we want to feel like we belong to a community. So with our friends, our family, other relationships that we have, that we really belong and we sort of are part of a community that we are together. And finally, self-actualization, which I really pretty much identify as your professional identity, your emerging professional identity. What is it like to be, if you want to say you are a medical student or a resident or someone who's in the healthcare profession? What does that behavior look like? Ideally, all of these things are going to be aligned with each other, but usually for really interesting situational judgment tests, there's going to be conflict in which there are conflicting sort of interests in terms of making sure all of these needs are met. And so I'm going to do that for this next scenario, which hopefully you will see on your screen. I'm interested, I don't have a specific prompt other than what would you do if you wanted to go to a party, but you are afraid that you might be pressured to drink alcohol. You will know that, by doing this, you want to be part of a community. And so you have friends that are there, but you don't want to be left out. You should be able to type in a response. And I think I have it set up here as a word cloud. So just briefly type in the response in the poll everywhere screen, just to get a sense of, what would you do, or what are the things that you think about if you're in such a situation, or if you've ever been in that situation before. I'm going to give you about a minute to, maybe like 30 to 40 seconds to kind of type in something into the screen and press return or press submit. Okay, I'm not unlocking it, but let me just get a sense of if this computer will let me see what some of your responses look like. So again, obviously with a word cloud, we're jumbling everybody's responses together, getting a sense of what the common words everyone is using, which pretty much, you're hopefully responding to the prompt when you are writing in your answers. But you can kind of get a sense, where everyone is thinking in terms of, if you get a designated driver, or, you want to make sure that, you articulate what your boundaries are. Those sorts of things in terms of talking to your friends, making sure that everyone enjoys themselves, even bringing your own drinks that are non-alcoholic. Those sorts of things are important. And so I just want to make sure that you guys understand, there's a lot of different ways to look at it. I obviously am doing this for the purpose of being more anonymous, but you get a sense of, what you feel about, when you are in such a situation. I'm going to keep moving on here. Let's see if I can do that with the next question or the next slide coming up. Okay, let me go back one. So, decisions. These situational judgment tests really focus on your decision making. And in a lot of cases, as you mentioned, for Casper, it's problem solving, but it's all more or less under the same umbrella. This is a very simple model of decision making, and it's so simple that we teach it to middle school students. What you have to understand is when you're given a situation, you want to identify the decision that you want to make. There may be more than one. Given that decision, you want to brainstorm the options in terms of how you address the situation and identify the possible outcomes or certainly the consequences of making those individual decisions. That will help you make the decision that you feel is the best one. And then after you see what happens, you should be able to reflect on that decision. For the most part, these situational judgment tests really will test very well on steps 1, 2, and 3. Step 5 is really important for many of you because many of you may have had similar opportunities where you've been in that type of a situation or something similar. And usually those reflections can inform you back to steps 2 and 3 in terms of having you shed some light on some options you would take or some outcomes. So all of those pieces are really critical and important for anybody who is going through these situational judgment tests. So I'm going to give you a very interesting scenario. I don't give you a specific prompt, but I am interested in thinking, in sort of eliciting from you some of your responses if this were the case. And so since many of you are applying to schools, it's certainly possible that, when you're researching a top program, you will find an unofficial social media site that, let's just say, compiles anonymous descriptions of racial aggressions against students. And a few of those posts that you read will call out professors or administrators who neglect to act on complaints. What are you thinking in terms of, how does this affect your perception of that top program, and what would you do next? That's really the prompt that I want to make sure I ask you guys for about the next minute. Type in your responses in here. This is a response that I put in here a little bit earlier. But I just want to make sure that I get a sense from you. What would you do? How would this affect the way you would look at that program? Or, what steps would you take?
He dropped off again. He'll be right back.
Okay, can you guys hear me again?
Yep.
All right, as I said, this is one of the reasons why Zoom is always so much fun for me. So let me see if, so I apologize for that. Let me see if there's a way I can get back to my slides here. Let's see. And I appreciate those of you guys for being real patient. Zoom has never been something that has worked very well for my computer here. So let me see if it's able to get back. So I apologize for that. If let's see if I can get to my other program and try to run it off of my other device here. So if you guys have questions that you see in the chat, Jubin or Veronica, I can try and see what I can do to answer them at this point. I apologize again as I'm trying to relog in.
Sure. We did have a question that came in, and it asked, are the scenarios presented on preview going to be related to issues of religion or politics?
That's a great question. I am going to, as I said, for preview, they are very much focused on your understanding of pre-professional behavior, especially in an academic or academic medical context. So none of the scenarios that I see in preview really allow one to focus on religious identity or anything related to specific cultures, unless there is something that causes or brings up the conflict in and of itself. Again, an example of that, I would probably just make sure that if you get a chance to look at the examples from the preview practice test, you'll see that many of them pretty much avoid conflicts due to political or religious positions, but they'd rather want to make sure that you understand what it's like to work in an academic setting. I think that's the most important piece.
The only thing that I would add is that you should definitely know some of the hot topics that are affecting healthcare today, like single payer healthcare, abortion. Those are all like important topics that you should have. You not need to be an expert, but you need to have some sort of basic understanding of it, because it could also come up on an interview question as well.
That's a great point. And I do want to make sure, I just want to make sure you guys know, don't neglect that fact. We're presenting you a number of different situations, especially with respect to the situational judgment tests themselves. But a lot of the scenarios that I bring up, if you are interested in those circumstances, will more likely come up in your general interviewing scenarios too, which, it's not going to be as standardized in looking for the specific competencies that I showed you a few slides back. Rather, it really focuses, again, both of those tests that we talk about really focus much more on your professionalism, your academic integrity, those sorts of core values, as opposed to a little bit more the nuances of identity or diversity in that sense. In terms of diversity, they really want to make sure that you are open, and they want to make sure you are appropriately respectful of other people's perspectives. Let me see, why is it doing this? It says unable to launch a video meeting. I am not sure what's going on with that. Sorry about that. So in any event, I'm trying to see how I can do this off my other computer. So those are just to let you know, you do need to still be able to know how to adequately discuss, how to sort of thread that needle and be sure that you can discuss some of those issues in a way that is appropriately professional. I think that's probably the way that I can describe it. Let's see. I'm trying to figure out what's going on with my other computer on that. I'm so sorry, guys. Let's see if there is a way I can do this. I'm going to try to run this off of my, I'm going to try to run something off of my phone here. I've never really done this. I'm going to see if this works. If I'm able to run it off my phone and see if I can share screen off of my phone. Let's see, it doesn't seem to like to do that too. This is one of the fun risks of trying to do things in Google. Sorry, guys. Again, please make sure you edit this out when before you post it. So one of the things, if I'm going to go off of what I'm going to read off of my slides here, I can share the slides with you guys near the end, no matter what happens. So if you guys are interested in it, then please don't hesitate to contact me one way or another about it.
Yeah, if you email me your PowerPoint, I'll post it on the website.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much. So I'm going to skip my next scenario, which I had here, which is more of a Casper style scenario, and just get to the main points of when you look at scenarios like this, you need to recognize what the context is. So in any of these scenarios, know where you are in the scenario and how you play against other individuals who happen to be participating in the scenario. I'm just going to go ahead and put my camera on just so that you see me. So, you need to recognize the context. Basically, if you are there with a group of other students, is everybody equal in that scenario? Or does one person have authority or represents the entire group? Who can you appeal to in the scenarios if there happens to be a problem? And when is it appropriate to appeal for having help? The other things that are very important, and especially important for preview, again, is understanding that a lot of times your actions are going to be defined or narrowed by the fact that you have certain rules or etiquette that you need to pay attention to. So we really harp on the fact that issues of professionalism, personal ethics or professional ethics, scope of the role that you play, become really important in looking at some of these scenarios. Academic integrity and student codes of conduct are really key and important in many of these types of scenarios that you're going to see, both in preview as well as in Casper. This, again, is among the things that are very, very highly important, but especially when you get into the Casper scenarios, a lot of times, as mentioned by that first question, some of the questions that you look at include core values. So things that define your community, if you're in a faith-based community, or your friends, your family, your school, if you have certain rules, unwritten rules that really identify that you belong within that community, what do you do, and how does that govern the way you act or react? And finally, the other piece that also winds up making really interesting scenarios is, of course, the instance of resource scarcity. So if you are limited in terms of time, in terms of money, in terms of food, in terms of health, how do you respond to that situation, or how can you respond to that situation? those elements of stress and other physiological responses are really key and very important. So when you go through the preview questions, you're going to see many of these types of scenarios really pop up. A scenario that I have also available and prepared, which I've created, independent of the preview questions that you see in the sample. I'm just going to read it out so that you guys can sort of get a sense of this scenario as an example. So you receive an email from your friend J, letter J, but the email was intended for the letter W, who is a patient that J saw earlier in the day. In that email, J summarized the visit with W, including some disclosure of various test results and a summary of a treatment plan with a request to schedule for follow-up. J was using their personal email to send the message. That ends the scenario. I'm going to give you guys time because I didn't put that into the Poll Everywhere poll. I'm going to give you time to type, maybe even type in your reaction to this scenario in the chat. So once again, you happen to receive an email from your friend Jay, and Jay was emailing patient W about their visit, and it includes a lot of detail about their test results during that visit. And Jay was using personal email message to send the message. So what are your first thoughts? What are some possible outcomes? What are some consequences? What are some competencies or principles you need to think about? Please go ahead and type it into the chat, and as best as I can, try to see what some of our responses happen to be. So I'll repeat the question again. You happen to have received an email from your friend Jay, who saw patient W earlier in the day. In your email, Jay had summarized the visit with patient W, which includes some disclosure of various test results and a summary of the treatment plan with a schedule to follow up. Jay was using their personal email to send this message.
You gonna type anything? All right, I typed something. Don't be shy. We don't record the chat. If you don't want to put it in the chat, you can put it in the Q&A anonymously.
Okay, I'm going to do my quick switch again. Come on. Okay, don't do this to me. All right, is everyone there?
Yep.
Okay, you can hear me, good. All right, let me see. I'm trying to get to the screen where I can share stuff. Let's see. So I appreciate those of you guys who spent the time to actually answer the question. So as you guys are thinking about it, and as I've been seeing some of your chat responses, one of the things that I want to make sure you are aware of is, okay, in a preview scenario, there are a number of different things that I want to make sure that you are aware of. And one of the things that's very important is for you to identify that question. What is the decision you need to make? Because one of the things that's very remarkable about preview is that you're going to be faced with a number of different possible answers to a number of different decisions. So you're going to be listed, you're going to be given a number of different possible scenarios or possible different actions. And so the question is how you negotiate, how you think each of these following actions is appropriate or not appropriate, or effective or not effective to these immediate actions. So for many of you who were thinking, again, I didn't put it in as a way for you to respond to it, but you can kind of think about what are the situations, what are the most important competencies or principles that you have to worry about. Many of you have identified the fact that there is such a thing called patient confidentiality. And so one should not be using your own personal email to send messages that are otherwise not encrypted, that discuss a patient's clinical information without their consent. And so there are a number of things that you need to think about. Is it a problem to send it with your personal email? Is it a problem to is it a problem that you have all this information? Was this a mistake? Those sorts of things come up. So you can kind of see I've given you 4 possible actions that you can take. And just by chance, how effective or ineffective are these types of decisions? Does it really address the real problem that you see? So again, these are just some examples. You'll probably get somewhere between 6 and 8 of these types of scenarios. And as you go through the practice preview booklet, you're going to get a sense of how you would negotiate that within the period of time you take to take the exam. A lot of students really like the preview exam because it's a multiple choice test and it doesn't require you really to do a lot more thinking. Most people are taking like 2 to 3 weeks maximum to prepare for these situational judgment tests because it doesn't really involve much more studying compared to the MCAT or any of the other content related exams. So but what you do need to be aware of is the format of the test, certainly how it's delivered, and give yourself some time to really understand what the test is really, what you're really being tested about. So let me hope that I can advance to the next on this situation, because I do want to get to your questions, and I do apologize I want to make sure we're all more or less on time with what we're trying to do. So I just want to make sure I encourage you guys to understand, you don't need to be perfect on these tests, and you're going to be entering a situation as a student. You're going to be making mistakes, and that's absolutely fine. One of the things that we've been developing is a situational judgment workshop. We are certainly able to bring this program, or at least go into a little bit more depth about situational judgment questions, to any campus. And so if you're interested, please reach out and contact us. The other thing that, I should go back a couple here. One more thing that we also do is we're doing online workshopping of situational judgment tests, questions itself, in our Becoming a Student Doctor program. It's available to anybody who is a supporter of HPSA and the Student Doctor Network, but we also allow for free enrollment into these resources if you happen to be eligible for a fee assistance program, if you happen to have earned a diploma from a high school in the United States in a medically underserved area. So if you're interested, please make sure you join us. We have a lot of background information, especially on these major topics that, it's important to know this for the purposes of your interviews, but you also need to know this for your future as well. It's not just about the application process. It's about the next 5 to 10 years of your career, and knowing what direction you want to take and how to take charge with your career and some of the challenges that you may observe or may experience in that whole entire process. So we want to make sure that you have that information and how that can be weaved into the various different types of questions you may experience, whether they be traditional situational judgment test questions, or they could be questions in a more quote unquote traditional interview format. So if you're interested, I leave with one last question, which should ultimately pop up in the Poll Everywhere poll once it pops up. If you would like to have, I know, and I will share with Jobin these slides so you guys get a chance to also see some of the responses that everyone else is taking. I'm interested in seeing if I get the download what everyone's responses are, and then you can quote grade them for yourselves to see sort of the variation in how people are thinking about various scenarios. So, you know, if you want to follow up on that, on being more involved with the situational judgment test workshops that we're doing with Becoming a Student Doctor, with bringing the situational judgment test workshop itself to your campus sometime, please feel free to click, you know, any one of those results, any one of those choices in the Poll Everywhere interface, and I'd be glad to try to follow up with you if you can. If you're able to and you can't register in Poll Everywhere, which captures your name and your email, just feel free to send Jubin a message, and he'll connect you with me later on afterwards. So I appreciate your patience, especially your patience with the technology. I'm sorry about it not being a little bit more smooth, but I do hope that you've learned something from this experience, that I hope that you can be more confident in your preparation for these types of tests, and whatever I can address or answer for you about, you know, how these are important in any sort of admissions decisions. Well, I can't totally answer that because the jury is still out, but I can do whatever I can. I assure you that your results will be taken very seriously in the overall context of holistic review at whatever school that you happen to be applying to. So with that, my camera is back on, and I do appreciate and thank all of you for joining us, and I'm well open to questions about your thoughts about situational judgment tests themselves.
Thank you, Dr. Check. One of the questions that came in is, are SJTs, are they going to be part of the match process?
So that's a really interesting question. I'm still not sure exactly. When you say part of the match process, the jury is still out because it's still relatively new, and it's only for certain residencies or only certain specialties that are right now sort of playing around with using these SJTs. So I still will refer back to the people who are program directors or the associations of those program directors to see how they're going to use it. So for example, last year, all of the ophthalmology program directors themselves decided to join in their efforts and require as many of their applicants to participate in the situational judgment test, the Casper, and possibly the Duet program, to help with, help sort for many of these program directors the large number of applications that they do see, and help them refine their pool to get to a short list. So that's normally how you would expect situational judgment tests to work anyway, by the way. This is nothing absolutely new. It's just the question of how those are incorporated. There's still a lot that's still very much unknown about whether those tests will really help select the types of future residents that these programs are really looking for. Again, it's meant to be part of a larger sort of context of holistic review. And one of the things that certainly I am aware of is, maybe they'll add situational judgment tests, but they may also, and I'm familiar that they are adding other elements in the ERIS application itself so that you can more properly articulate some of your background. I know for many of you, you may have seen the disadvantage question change for AMCAS to other impactful experiences essay. Well, it also happened in ERIS for 2024 as well. So that's just an example that there are concurrent changes, simultaneous changes that are occurring on both sides. So it's just that with SJT, that what I do know is that AAMC is not doing a situational judgment test for the residency programs, as far as I know, but for those programs that are looking at Casper, they're trying it out and they're going to see what happens. So that list that I showed a little bit earlier, it shows 6 different programs or residency specialties that are listed. I think last year there was only like 3. So again, this is something that's gained interest. I'm not sure what's going to happen, and the jury is still out on that.
Thank you. The next set of questions that came up were about fees. Are there fees for these exams, or what should a student prepare themselves to pay?
That's a fantastic question, and I know something I kind of skimmed over and didn't really talk about. You should definitely go to each of the test constructors' websites, and they will have the schedule of fees set up. I believe for the preview exam, there's a flat fee rate. For the Casper exam, there's definitely a flat fee rate. And if you have to take Duet and the snapshot assessments, those are included in the Casper fee. Both of those sites will also talk about fee reductions or fee waivers as well. So especially for AAMC, if you qualified for a fee assistance program waiver, just as you had a reduction in the cost of having to apply to medical school, getting free resources for the MCAT and so forth, you're also come with a free, I think your test for taking preview is free and also covered under the FAP, letter. I think there's a similar process that also will be recognized for Casper as well. I believe it's a full fee waiver. I don't think it's a partial fee waiver, but again, the websites will talk about that too, as well as specific eligibility. So like, for example, if any of you who are out there happen to have been involved in the JAMP, the JAMP program in Texas, there's a fee waiver that's associated with your participation there. So you would need to really read into it. Otherwise, I believe it's, I think, about $100 for preview, and it's about $90 for Casper. So it's about the same rate for that. And again, the test time period that we're talking about is, it's nice that it's at home. You probably won't spend more than 1.5 hours to 2 hours on each of those assessments. The Casper specifically, it's 15 additional minutes that doesn't have to be taken immediately after Casper for Duet. You'll learn a little bit more about it, and again, they are more than happy to give you advice regarding the payment structure. It also includes accommodations, by the way, in terms of you really, letting the test constructors know if you require accommodations. There's a process that each of those test sites have set up, hopefully, so that you can talk about and declare in advance your need for additional assistance or some sort of special accommodations. There has been discussion on the preview side of things that, for the most part, I think most of those accommodations will just be extended time. There is a very small and rare opportunity in some cases where the circumstances, based on whatever is disclosed and for accommodations, requires one to be actually take it at a secured test center, such as a Prometric center, similar to where you take MCAT. So again, those are things that can be hammered out, but you should start very early or as soon as you can if you do require those accommodations, and get into a dialogue with those test constructors to see what documentation that they need. Preview has been very transparent about how they actually will review many common accommodation requests, and a lot of those don't require a very long period of time for approval. So definitely go to the websites and make sure you read up on those if that's what you need.
Thank you for that. One of the questions that also came up, usually how soon after taking the MCAT do students take these tests, the SJTs? Do they wait a while? Do they do it after the application has been sent off, or how does it really work?
So I'm sure to basically tell you and tell you in full honesty, the jury is still out. There's not going to be an absolute correct answer, but one of the things that, as a former admissions person, that you do need to be aware of is how this fits in your overall sort of application processing. I've been involved with schools that required Casper, for example, and for sure, they would not advance your application for consideration of an interview if that Casper score were not included. Same thing for the MCAT. If they don't have your MCAT score, they're not going to move your file. So basically the issue is going to be how soon is your full application that you submit up front, when is it going to be complete with your primary application, your secondaries, in some cases your letters, or at least required letters, your test scores, and now the SJT score. All of those things need to be at least received by your admissions staff at the particular schools before they advance your file forward. So So for timing purposes, it really depends. Casper is a test that you need to take the Casper exam in the application cycle when you are applying. It does not carry over into future years. So if you are taking if you find out from looking at your school's website on your school list that this program requires Casper, you need to sort of factor that in your overall submission strategy of all of your materials. For PREview, a PREview is designed to be very similar in behavior in terms of its scoring to the MCAT. So many of us know that for you to take the MCAT, you don't have to take the MCAT every year. For most schools, if you have taken it within 3 years of matriculation, it will count. The AAMC at least intends to make sure that if you took the PREview exam, you don't have to feel compelled to take it every year the same way. So if you get a very strong PREview score, then that score, just like a very strong MCAT score, can carry on with you for an additional 2 or 3 application cycles. So that's the design and the intent of PREview, the way that it is scored and the way that it is designed. So if you happen to have, now that we've had a number of people who've taken this exam before, and you took the PREview exam, say last year, and you scored very well on it, you obviously then have a score in hand. Just like if you took the MCAT last year or very early in the process, you have a score in hand that will help you expedite the processing of your application. So I hope that gives you an idea. I tell people treat the PREview exam in terms of when it's important in your application, just like you treat your MCAT, because of that particular purpose and reason. So I would certainly say if you guys are focused on your MCAT score, do well on your MCAT. Do it as soon as you possibly can. The PREview scores, if you find out that you need a PREview score, plan on taking it. Give yourself maybe, this is just me and my advice, give yourself about a month or so afterwards to plan on taking the PREview exam. Don't wait too long, because again, it's just like taking the MCAT. You don't want to wait until September to take the MCAT score, and with processing of applications, it just becomes really more challenging with rolling admissions that most schools usually behave in. So, again, I hope that gives you an idea that conceptually that's how you should think, not necessarily telling you when you should take this exam.
Yes, it does. Thank you. The next question that came up, I think they want clarification on the question of accommodations. So if someone is having connectivity, like broadband issues, and cannot take one of these exams at home, then they should seek accommodations from the test makers or the companies?
Well, when I talk about accommodations, it's really much more about, your own testing accommodation. So as a person who takes exams, like on the MCAT, what accommodations you require for the MCAT, as an example. So issues of broadband and so forth like that, that's something that when you go to the PREview site, you will see
Hello?
I think he froze.
They want you to make sure you can do that you are in a, are you still there? Okay, yep. That you're in a, okay, that you're in a, that you can technically, I just want to make sure I can stop my sharing. Excuse me.
Yeah, it stopped.
Okay, so I think we just want to make sure that when you see the requirements that you're in a safe space, that you're not going to be interrupted, say, with family, or if my cat decides to interrupt me again, those sorts of things. So you are responsible for certain measures to ensure that you can take this test without interruption. So if you have those challenges at home, this is an opportunity to see if maybe if you went to your local community college or your local university or your local library, if you're able to sort of reserve a space and be able to take your exam there, and hopefully you'll have better broadband or better bandwidth to be able to take care and accommodate the technical challenges of the exam. But I mean other things, that if you are like diagnosed with some sort of learning disability or some sort of or a learning accommodation is required of you in terms of taking the exam. That's something that is important for many of us for diversity and inclusion purposes. And that's what I really refer to. Again, go to the websites and really read a little bit into what they would like to allow for accommodations, and that should hopefully guide you along the way.
Yeah, so if you're not doing them in testing centers, I know that in California, you could go to any community college and use their library. You could also go to most public library, and all of them have Zoom rooms set up. I know most community colleges, they do, and I know some public libraries do as well. And some of them have computers in there. Some of them you have to take your computer in. And so those resources, if you can't do it at home for broadband issues, or if you just have 7 roommates and you can't control, or an out of control cat or dog, or so there's all these resources that are available to you for free, and you don't have to pay to use those resources that are available to you.
Any other questions, Veronica?
No, I think so. I think a lot of people that we've seen questions come through and questions come up is, how do you take practice exams? How do you prepare for them? And I think that's what everybody's anxiety level is, personally.
Yeah, and as I said, that will remain to be a challenge. Again, the Acuity Insights group, there is, as far as I'm aware, there is a website that you can go in and you can see sample questions, or you can see certain scenarios and videos, but it will not completely simulate taking the test. And you could probably scour all over the internet, I mean, whether we're talking YouTube or everywhere else, and you will see sample questions. I mean, we've developed sample questions on our website and in the forums and so forth. And another student organization that we've worked very closely with, that's Canadian or Canada-based, they also do peer review of Casper questions. But finding the simulation of running, of taking the exam itself is something that is an elusive challenge, partly because you can't really. I'm sure there's some intellectual property issues if one wanted to try to totally emulate the Casper interface. So so again, those are some of the challenges that we have, and those are things that we're trying to help out with on our side of the house to really make sure that people get to a point where they feel more confident in the test, that they get a good idea of some of the things that you should expect or anticipate. But for the most part, when you look at the data of people who are taking the test, most people are have been doing really well on preview. I mean, again, if you've been immersed in an academic environment for a number of years, the behavior that we expect of students is not going to be that much different from the behavior that they prompt in the preview questions. There shouldn't be too much of a shock, in other words. So on the preview questions themselves. The Casper questions tend to be drawn a little bit more from more real life situations and scenarios, as opposed to strictly an academic or academic medical school side of those types of scenarios themselves. But again, for the most part, hopefully there's an element of common sense that in terms of how you formulate your answer, it shouldn't be a problem. It's delivering the answer that winds up being the challenge, and that's what worries most people when it comes to taking the test. And also, just as importantly, again, knowing how to score well is not something that's really easy to describe. I mean, again, because the Acuity Insights team doesn't really share their grading rubric, it's really hard to kind of figure out whether your answer, quote, is good enough. All you can do is just basically act normally and respond as normally and naturally as you can to a situation. What we can tell you, and what a lot of other people who have been studying Casper for a number of years can tell you, is make sure you understand those competencies, the ones that I had in red a little bit earlier, which are, collaboration and empathy. Make sure there's some element that you consider, if the situation is appropriate, that your answer expresses empathy, expresses collaboration, that you have a very good sense of problem solving that includes as many people in the decision-making process as possible. And then hopefully that will give you some guidance in terms of, where you should go in terms of your affect or your thinking as a pre-professional student that they're trying to look for. But otherwise, as I said, a lot of us on the advising side have been trying to get, and admission side have been trying to get more information about what, how do you do well on these tests. So.
Well, I do appreciate all the insight with this, and I think for myself personally, I'm going to prepare to take both because I am casting a wide net for a lot of schools, and a lot of schools are jumping on board for these types of exams. So I do appreciate all this advice that you gave us today.
Well, thank you so much. Again, sorry about the technical issues, but I hope that at least the gist of many of the things that I've talked about here are easily communicated to those of you who have to take one, the other, or possibly both of those exams. And then again, it's not necessarily over, especially with the virtual interviews that come up. If you know that a school is going to do a virtual MMI, many of these principles are going to come up again. So it's just that it will not be necessarily constrained to just the competencies that we talk about. As Jubin had mentioned, some of them may talk about your awareness of issues that are critical in healthcare. And so again, that's why we did our Becoming a Student Doctor courses, to really help get a stronger sense of what background you probably could be familiar with if you don't already have that background before. So, so I hope that helps anybody who really wants to be involved with that.
Alrighty, well, thank you very much, and I hope everyone has a great weekend. And thank you again, Dr. Chalk. And yeah, if you could just email me the presentation so I could post it.
We'll do that. Thank you so much for having me. And again, thank you so much to Pre-Med CC for being one of our partners with Health Professional Student Association. Hope we can continue this forward, and let me know if I can help you more.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.